We move to questions to the Minister for Justice. Congratulations, Mr Dowd, on getting through all of your topicals. Move to questions for Minister for Justice. That's something for that Minister to follow. We have questions 2, 3 and 8 are withdrawn. Questions 6 and 10 are grouped. Call Maurice Bradley.
Question 1.
Minister.
The prison service requires resources it needs to help people who live and work in prison safe and secure, and to support the rehabilitation and resettlement back into the community of people in their care. Earlier this year, the prison service reviewed its operational staffing levels due to the significant and sustained increase in prisoner population. In keeping with the findings of that review, I agreed to an increase in the prison service's staffing complement of 75 prison officers. The prison service is currently working with NI Civil Service HR partners to confirm recruitment arrangements for a custody prison officer campaign that will launch in October.
Mr Bradley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. But could I ask the Minister, in view of the circumstances that abound in England because of overcrowding, where prisoners are being let out early, does she envisage anything like that in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
Well, I've learned in this job never to say never, but at the moment we're not in that situation. We currently have adequate capacity in our prisons for prisoners to be able to serve the entirety of their sentence. We also have adequate staff, so we're not in an overcrowded situation. However, I'm conscious, and it's one of the reasons why we're going out to recruitment, that those numbers are significantly higher than was anticipated with the current complement of prison officers. And in order to keep people safe and ensure that the regime is able to operate effectively, it is important that we have the prison properly staffed, and I think that the new custody prison officer recruitment will go a long way to help that.
Dr Reagan.
Thank the Minister for her reply so far. The Minister will be aware of the morale problems within the prison service at the moment, and indeed one of the things that may be affecting the recruitment process is the fact that many prison officers feel as if they haven't been listened to, particularly in issues to do with NICS HR and what it's been doing to. Would the Minister commit to an independent review to look at this process within the Northern Ireland Civil Service HR process to make sure our prison officers are not badly treated as they believe they are?
Minister.
Review of NIC, Northern Ireland Civil Service HR, would be a matter for the Department of Finance, not the Department of Justice. However, I have done work to try to add support for prison officers. So, for example, both serving and former officers now have the opportunity to avail of the Police Rehabilitation and Resettlement Trust and their facilities. We have also put in Prisons Well as a system and have provided wellbeing hubs at the prisons. So there is considerable work going on to support prison officers in what is an increasingly complex job. We also have, I have to say, already discussed issues with respect to the HR issues around prison officers, and the fact that many prison officers feel that their jobs are distinct and different from many of the others in the civil service. It is, however, sad that at times when people get up in the chamber, they don't acknowledge that when they're talking about levels of absenteeism and injury and sickness, and make, I think, rather spurious claims about the high levels of absenteeism without recognising that actually our absenteeism in DOJ reflects the number of people who are deployed within prison service.
Neil McAllister.
Question number 4.
Minister.
All types of violence are linked, and we know that there is still much to do to support women who face paramilitary harm. It is completely and unequivocally unacceptable. At ministerial and official level, we are in close and regular contact with those delivering the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, the Domestic and Sexual Abuse strategy, and it is essential to see these as complementary efforts that work together to support those who continue to face harm, but also ensure that we prevent this happening in the first place.
McAllister.
I thank the Minister for her answer so far. The Minister will be aware of the recently published report by Dr Aisling Swain that highlighted the prevalence of violence against women and girls by paramilitaries. Would you be able to provide your assessment of that publication?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I want to commend both Dr Swain and also Foyle Women's Aid for the important research that was produced on the topic of paramilitary-related gendered coercive control. I was very pleased to be at the launch of that report to signal my very clear support for the work that's being done on this. The research, I think, is a very timely and important piece of research which provides real insight into the lived experience of women who have faced paramilitary-related gendered coercive control, and the report and the testimonies of the victim survivors makes for harrowing and sobering reading. These women have faced horrendous physical and sexual harm, including threats, surveillance, displacement, and within relationships where they should have felt safe. The violence against women and girls and paramilitary violence are also linked, and the new End Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and strategic framework and draft programme for government, also published this month, speak to the importance of addressing these issues. We recognise that violence does not happen in a vacuum, Mr Speaker, and violence against women and girls and ongoing paramilitary violence are linked. We now need to take this real opportunity to ensure that there is a comprehensive and joined-up response.
Joanne Bunting.
Mr Speaker, the Department made a bid, a transformation bid, with regard to the ending violence against women and girls, and unfortunately that did not move to the next stage. Can I ask the Minister what her plans are for the next step, since that bid was unsuccessful?
Minister.
Well, the bid was from the Department in terms of the justice elements of that, and also TEO, so it was a cross-departmental bid. We will still have to deliver on the End in Violence Against Women and Girls framework, and obviously there are significant parts of that which will fall to my department. However, I think the most important parts of that are now around early intervention. We have made many changes following the Gillen Review in terms of how the justice system responds to violence against women and girls. There is still much work to be done in that space, and I hope to address some of that in a victims bill later in this mandate. But in terms of the work that's being done jointly between our departments, we will continue to do that, because it's important that we are not competing for the same resources when we're doing the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls and the Domestic and Sexual Abuse Strategy. From my perspective, the two are distinct, and whilst there are synergies in them, we also need to recognise that myself and the Minister for Health are leading in the Domestic and Sexual Violence and Abuse Strategy are also considering all victims, not only women and girls, so we are also considering male victims of those issues, but there are synergies and we want to make the most of those.
And I think you've answered my question, I think, already in the most part, but we have the DOJ's Tackling Paramilitary Criminality and Organised Crime programme, we have the TEO's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls framework, and we have the PSNI's Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls, which has been running for 2 years now. Does the Minister think it is time now to have a single strategic lead in regards to this, so that we aren't duplicating resource?
Well, I think that first of all, in terms of the End in Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, I actually proposed that it would be the Executive Office that would take it forward, because this isn't just a matter for justice or for policing, it is a matter for the whole executive. Every department has a role to play, whether that be health, whether it be education, whether it be the economy or communities. We all have a role to play in terms of ending violence against women and girls, which is much wider than domestic and sexual violence and abuse, where health and justice take the lead. So I think it is important also that every strand and every department also have their own internal strategies to deal with these issues. But it's important that that isn't about duplication, it is about learning from best practice. One of the strong things about the Tackling Paramilitarism programme is that we have found out what works in terms of harm reduction in the context of paramilitary violence, and I think there is an opportunity to then apply that in other areas where we want to reduce harm.
Owen Tennyson.
Question 5, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
My department is currently facing stabilisation pressures of £48 million. This projected potential overspend was reported to the Department of Finance as part of the recent in-year exercise. In addition, the department is also facing exceptional pressures of £227 million in relation to legal claims for McLeod injury to feelings, data breach and holiday pay. These costs are not affordable within my department's budget under any circumstance. Whilst my department has been proactive in taking actions over the last few years to ensure we live within budget, we are now at the point where all options have been exhausted. Given the severity of the financial position and the demand-led nature of justice expenditure, there is no scope for my department to absorb the remaining level of pressures.
Mr Tennyson.
I thank the Minister for her answer. Minister, could I ask for your assessment of how the relative needs of your department and the PSNI have been accounted for in the proposed needs-based factor from the UK Government?
Well, I would have to say not very well would be the best way to describe it. In terms of measuring need, what they did was look at the allocation that was made to the department in 2017-18. By then, the ring fencing of the department's finances that had existed from 2010 to 2014 had been removed, and there had been, I suppose, a bit of a raid on the department's finances. So rather than reflecting what we needed to run the department and to provide the services that we're required to provide, it instead reflected what we actually had to do that and the envelope within which we were working. I think it's important to recognise that there are certain elements of policing and justice here that, by their very nature, by our geographical location, and without any reference to special circumstances, do require a higher level of investment. One example is the cost of mutual aid in comparison to other forces across the UK, where we can't provide that as cheaply. So that's one of the reasons why we need to look at those, and it's an area that I know the Department of Finance and my officials are working very hard to raise with Treasury in terms of ensuring that we are properly reflected based on evidence around the higher needs-based factor, which I believe Northern Ireland should achieve.
Mr. McNulty.
Would the Minister agree that continued underfunding of police will continue to erode faith in the justice system to the detriment of victims, and would the Minister agree that the police constables should take every measure possible in order to secure adequate funding to keep people and communities safe?
Minister.
I think it's important that we all take every possible opportunity to ensure that policing and justice is properly funded. I have the dual duty of ensuring that policing is properly funded, but also ensuring the remainder of the justice system is properly funded. There is no point funding one at the expense of the other. That will not enhance victim confidence. It will not enhance the confidence in the community. If people are arrested and then have to sit for 5, 6, 7 years before they get to court, that will not help victims. So it's important that when I get resources into the Department of Justice, that we properly allocate it in a balanced way to ensure that the entire system is able to function. At the moment, we don't have the resources to be able to do that across the board.
Mr. McHugh.
John Corder, number 6.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I want to answer questions 6 and 10 together. The Northern Ireland Prison Service prioritises rehabilitation by supporting and challenging those in its care to change and address their offending behaviour. This includes providing opportunities through a wide and progressive curriculum for individuals to develop skills and attain qualifications that will give them the best chance to secure and sustain employment on release. The Prison Service offers a varied curriculum of accredited training from entry level to level 3 in education, vocational and employability skills, in addition to further education opportunities, which have been designed to meet the diverse needs of the prison population. The curriculum is kept under continuous review to respond to the changing needs of the prison population, emerging industries within the labour market and labour market shortages, including current and future skills gaps. The provision of learning and skills is outsourced to our professional delivery partner in Belfast Met, who recently completed a substantive curriculum review, which included the education provision at McGilligan. The recommendations from this review will be used to inform the strategic direction of learning and skills provision over the next 5 to 10 years and respond to the challenges presented by a rising prison population.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer to this point. And can you provide for us an assessment of the current provision of courses available in prison for offenders?
Minister.
Well, as I've said, there are a wide range of curriculum offered, from essential skills such as numeracy and literacy, vocational skills ranging from barbering to bricklaying, and employability skills, including soft skills, writing CVs and interviewing techniques. But we're also trying to enhance constantly the learning experience in line with what's offered in the community and support future-proofing of that learning so that we can develop the use, for example, of digital technology with all the challenges that presents within a prison system. Plans are at a very early stage, with a pilot due to commence shortly in Maghaberry to test the viability of virtual delivery across the prison estate, which may also enhance opportunities. It has the potential to maximise class numbers and also expand the learning and skills curriculum. But most learners prefer a blended approach, so they do like the human touch, and it's important that we get that balance right in terms of access, but also in terms of support.
Yes.
And thank you to the Minister for her answers thus far. I suppose I'd like to ask the Minister if she could indicate if her department has any plans to introduce specific rehabilitation courses for offenders that have been jailed in relation to a domestic violence offence.
We do have specific programmes that are there in terms of working with people who have offended, and they are tailored to their offending behaviour. Probation Service provides some of those schemes, and there are ones for perpetrators of domestic violence and abuse. One of the challenges that we face in the prison system at the minute is that many of the people who are within the prison system are there on remand and therefore tend not to want to engage in programmes that are about challenging their offended behaviour, because most of them are still trying to maintain a position that they're not guilty ahead of their trial. And that makes it very difficult. So while we can offer general education to those prisoners, and many will avail of that, they will often avoid the kind of perpetrator and behaviour change programmes that I think are absolutely critical to rehabilitation successfully, and particularly in the space of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse.
Stuart Dixon.
Thank you, Minister, for your answers so far. Minister, can I particularly welcome the review of education services by Belfast Met? Can you assure the House that that will not only future-proof those courses, but will also look at how we broaden out the type of education service that can be provided to prisoners?
Yes, I think it's very important that we do that. We are obviously committed both to ensuring that when people leave the prisons that they are rehabilitated in the truest sense, in that their attitudes and their offending behaviour have been successfully challenged and changed, but also that they have skills to be able to seek employment post-release. And we're working now on a series of skills academies where we are able to train people up for particular areas where we know there are job shortages and where prisoners may benefit from the additional skills training that we can provide within the prison system. We also need to work, though, with people in the community, and one of the things that I've been doing since returning to office has been engaging with the business community and talking to them, first of all, about the opportunities that exist within prisons to train people up for specific lines of work. Secondly, to talk to them about the positives that come from employing people who have an offending background, because many of them are very grateful for the opportunity to get a job and very keen to make a contribution. And thirdly, we can then test with them what the key areas are where there are new opportunities that we can then adapt our training. We need to be agile to ensure that whatever we produce in terms of the prison system, that we are producing skills that are actually of value in the workplace.
Question 7.
Minister.
Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service has provided £500,000 of additional resourcing to the Planning Appeals Commission each year since 2021. NICS officials continue to meet with the PAC Chief Commissioner to consider any resourcing pressures, including vacant posts. At present, there is only one vacant post in the Commission, which is due to be filled in January 2025. The Northern Ireland Audit Office has recently initiated a strategic review of the PAC. This will consider the overall role and function of the Commission, the challenges it currently faces, and options available to improve performance and wider planning outcomes in Northern Ireland.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for the answer. And it is widely recognised that the performance of the PAC is not where it needs to be, and I think everybody would concur with that. What more can be done to improve its efficiency? And also just an update on that review from the Audit Office, if that's possible. Thank you.
Well, the Audit Office review has only been announced, and so there's no update as such to be able to be given on that. With respect to the performance and whether or not it's effective, the Chief Commissioner specifically addressed performance matters in the PACWAC annual review for 2022-23. From the initial statistics prepared in advance of the Chief Commissioner's annual report 23-24, performance continues to improve, with the Commission's performance showing the highest increase in decisions over the past 5 years. The final report will be published later in the autumn, and hopefully members will be pleased at the progress being made.
Tommy Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 9, please.
Minister.
My department is committed to delivering its responsibilities under the Climate Change Northern Ireland Act 2022 and in supporting DAERA in the development of the first Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan. While the Department of Justice is not a sectoral lead under the Act, we aim to contribute to the sectors of buildings, transport and energy. Our 2023 outline sustainable strategy sets out our goals and supporting actions to reduce our carbon footprint. For example, we have established in 2021-22 as our baseline year for measuring our energy consumption and reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. We have an active information programme in place to encourage behavioural change with our staff, both in the workplace and at home.
Mr. Donnelly.
Thanks to the Minister for her answer so far. Could the Minister give some detail on the scope of her department's sustainability strategy?
The Department strategy covers the core department and its agencies. Centred to the delivery of the Department strategy are the respective strategies of NICTS, Northern Ireland Prison Service and PSNI, and they have their own goals and targets and are reported on separately. The Department's agenda is progressed under 3 sustainability pillars: economic, social and environmental, each with their own supporting actions. Key to the delivery of the strategy was the establishment of that baseline year as 2021-22, so we can manage our energy consumption and measure it against that particular aspect. We have some key initiatives in progress. The solar farm at Hyde Bank Wood is now operational and has the capacity to reduce electricity bills by up to £60,000 per year. Prison Service are also working in collaboration with the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, RSPB and Woodland Trust to develop biodiversity action plans for each of our sites, because one thing we do have is space and land. They're also playing a leading role in sustainability in prison. An international conference is being held in York on the 24th and 25th of September, to which they will be making contributions. And then finally, we have solar panels installed in several courthouses, including in Laganside. But most importantly, Mr Speaker, modernisation of the Royal Courts of Justice project aspires to make the Royal Courts of Justice a building of the same era as this one, the first fully decarbonised Grade A listed building in Northern Ireland. That also includes refurbishment of the Old Town Hall building when it reopens, and I think will make a significant impact both in terms of heritage and in terms of the environment.
Question 12, please.
Minister.
I will consider the findings and recommendations of the review in due course and will publish the findings as appropriate following consultation with key stakeholders, including the Justice Committee.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Minister for her brevity. Could I just ask that, given that we've said we're going to finish this review by December, and if we think that the Policing Board is so key to policing, do we not think that we've pushed this in far too early and it should be given time to finish its review as it requires and deemed fit?
Minister.
Well, I'm aware of the members' concerns around the timeframe, but I think it is appropriate given the scope of the review and also given the urgency of the report. If the independent reviewers consider they need additional time, of course, I'll be open to considering it. I'm also aware that it's important too that we get results from this and are able to look forward. So I think both from the Policing Board's point of view and from the departments, it is important that we try to keep this a short and tightly focused review that deals with the main issues which actually instigated the review in the first place.
John Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I think the Minister has just at the end answered the question I anticipated making. So I'm going to ask instead that to try and clarify the time it has taken up to this point. Isn't it the case, through you, Mr Speaker, to the Minister, that some of the to and fro from the Policing Board to the Department caused delay until this juncture, and that none of the delay was caused by the Department itself?
Mr.
Well, I think there are a number of things. I mean, first of all, when I came back in February, I reflected on the fact that the Policing Board had intended to take forward a review itself, and I decided on balance that in order to ensure that that was as independent as possible and would command as much public confidence as possible, that it would be better for the sponsor department of DOJ to take that forward. We then had to look at the terms of reference of the review, and obviously there have been things that have happened in the interim, which as a result mean that the terms of reference need to be slightly wider than was originally anticipated. And then finally we had to find the correct people to take that review forward and to do that in a timely fashion. That might sound like a lot of words to say that it was not as a straightforward an issue as perhaps people expected that it would be. The key thing for me is that it's now underway. The board are content with the terms of reference and the engagement with the panel has already commenced.
Matthew Till.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, I welcome the fact that this independent review was announced. There has been an occasional challenge and pushback in this chamber about your responsibility for policing. So can you confirm for the record that should this independent review come back with substantive recommendations for either legislative, regulatory or any other change, that it will be your department which takes those reforms forward?
Well, I can't anticipate what they will come forward with, and therefore I can't anticipate which department it would be that would take it forward. Many of the structures that surround the tripartite arrangements for policing and justice are not devolved and are part of the 1998 Act and would need to be dealt with at Westminster. Others are devolved to my department. And yes, I accept that for some members it has been incredibly difficult to come to terms with the fact that I cannot answer questions on behalf of the policing on operational matters. But this is not an operational policing review. This is a review of the board and its relationships, and it is entirely appropriate that it's done independently, but the report will also be presented to the board.
Diane Dodds.
Mr Speaker, question 13.
Minister.
The budget allocation attributed to the PSNI part-time reserve is an operational matter for the Chief Constable, who continues to be accountable to the Policing Board. It is important that I respect his operational independence and that of the Policing Board itself.
Minister. Ms Dodds, rather.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Minister will agree with me that many of our part-time reserve have served through terrible times in Northern Ireland. They've faced great and personal danger as they continue their ordinary workplace and serve our community and ensure our safety. Will the Minister ensure that, whether the funding is brought about by herself or the Chief Constable, that there is at least a good discussion about a fair allocation to these brave officers?
Minister.
I think it's important that everyone who serves in the PSNI, whether they be officers, part-time reserve or members of staff, are properly remunerated for the work that they do and the risk that they take on our behalf. Ultimately, I have to, as does the Chief Constable and indeed every other arm's-length body, we have to live within our budget, and we strive to do so and be responsible with public money. But we recognise that there are real challenges. The part-time reserve is a matter entirely for the Chief Constable. Whether he wishes to strengthen it, whether he wishes to reduce its complement, is again a matter for him and not one for me as Justice Minister. But I'm absolutely committed that, irrespective of which part of the PSNI people serve, that they will be properly remunerated for the work that they do.
Andy Allen. Minister.
Given the complexity of ASB, it cannot be addressed by the criminal justice system alone. It requires effective partnership working across local and central government to identify the causes and put in place solutions to prevent incidents arising and to tackle the cumulative impact that ASB has on individuals and communities. This partnership approach is evidenced by the work of the Policing and Community Safety Partnerships, funded by my department and the Policing Board, for which tackling ASB is a key strategic priority. PCSPs lead in my department's operational response to specific concerns at a local level, working with designated partners, local statutory bodies and agencies, the voluntary sector and the community sector to tackle actual and perceived ASB in our communities. At a strategic level, the Community Safety Network, chaired by my department, promotes shared and collective ownership by partners both in and outside of justice to ensure a collaborative response to a multifaceted community safety issue such as ASB. Additionally, where a criminal justice response is appropriate and to ensure the relative authorities have effective and proportionate enforcement powers, my department has led a multi-agency cross-departmental review of ASB legislation, launched a joint public consultation with DFC on potential legislative change and is now progressing with the outworkings of that consultation.
I call Peter McReynolds, or Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. And as the Minister has highlighted the impact of antisocial behaviour on so many within our society, can the Minister advise what steps her department's taken, perhaps in conjunction with the PSNI, to clamp down on the illegal sale of fireworks, which can often be used as part of ASB?
Minister.
Well, there is significant work that is ongoing, particularly at this time of year, around fireworks, and it's something that we work together with the PSNI and others on. There is a strong regulatory framework already in place regarding fireworks, and where people fail to either comply with it in terms of sales or purchase, there are penalties available for that are used. I think more importantly is to ask people to be responsible around the use of fireworks. The noise can be distressing both for children, for adults and particularly for animals. There are now low noise fireworks available that have all the pizzazz and none of the fear attached to them, and I think it's something that people should increasingly consider using.
Peter McReynolds.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, do you share my absolute condemnation of the ongoing and sustained objects placed at the Henry Jones playing fields in East Belfast and the disruption this is having on sports, education and the local community?
Minister.
I do, and I think it goes way beyond antisocial. I think it's actually veering into the space of hate crime in terms of the intimidation of the GAA users of that pitch. I don't think it's acceptable. I think it is incredibly disruptive, not only to those who play GAA, but to those who use the pitches for other purposes and for other sports. It's incredibly disrespectful and disruptive to the children, both of the nursery and local primary school, and also to their parents. And I do think that those who are behind this campaign really need to catch themselves on and recognise that there is space enough in this world for us all, and what we need to do is respect other people's traditions and allow them to get on with their lives in peace and quiet without this disruption. It also, I have to say, is becoming a drain on PSNI resources, which is hardly helpful at a time when we need the PSNI to be active, preventing crime and dealing with serious issues, rather than this kind of stupid behaviour which is completely disruptive and completely unnecessary.
Mr. Carroll's not in his place, so that brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister, and congratulations and get them all done, Minister. I think that's the first. We now move to topical questions, and I call Justin McNulty.
Minister, you may have seen journalist Rebecca Black's worrying piece in today's Irish News on a recent damning report from the Commissioner for Victims of Crime, Geraldine Hanna, that identified there are only 7% of crime victims who are confident that the North's criminal justice system can deliver for them. Do you recognise that the justice system is failing victims, and what action do you propose to take to address this damning reality?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Commissioner-designate for engaging with victims of crime and seeking feedback on their experience of the criminal justice system. It's essential that victims feel confident that when they report a crime, they'll have their case investigated and prosecuted where there's evidence to support a prosecution, and that they will be treated appropriately and sensitively throughout the system. Right across the criminal justice system, a lot of work has already been progressed to improve the experiences of and support for victims of crime, and to ensure that they receive the services they're entitled to under the Victims' Charter. This includes ensuring victims can avail of emotional support when giving evidence, which the Department funds through Victim Support NI and the NSPCC. My department allocates funding of around £1.8 million per year for the provision of support services to victims and witnesses by Victim Support and NSPCC's Young Witness Service. However, I would say this, that if we had more resource, first of all, the justice system would speed up. Secondly, people would get a resolution of their case much more quickly. Thirdly, we would be able to provide better service, because often it is change at the last minute because people are not fully prepared, that causes delay. And all of those things impact on people's system, or people's view of the system. But there is a huge challenge ahead if we are to ensure that our justice system improves. It will require investment. I have been asking for that investment for some time.
Mr. McNulty.
Thank the Minister for her answer. The survey results show that the satisfaction with treatment by the police was only 8%, with respondents saying that incidents, particularly of domestic abuse, were belittled and not taken seriously, and that officers were not trained to deal with sexual assault. These statements are in direct contrast to the aims of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy launched by your department last week. Would the Minister accept that the absence of a systemic reform in her department and the budget set by her department actively harms victims and deters them from coming forward to report crimes?
Minister.
I agree that there's been a lack of systemic reform in my department. Quite the contrary, we have led the way in terms of the domestic abuse offence in the last mandate, legislating for domestic abuse, and also in that domestic abuse legislation putting forward the need for training for police officers, which was included in that, and that has been ongoing. That is not in any way to answer for the PSNI and their role in this, and that's something that I'm sure your colleagues will take up through the policing board, where the Chief Constable can be questioned about policing response. However, it is disappointing when people have negative experiences, which is why I spend a considerable amount of my time listening to victims, both of domestic and sexual violence, but also of other crimes, so that I can be clear that the pathway that we have plotted out is the one that is actually followed in real time. That is often not the case, and only some of it is down to resourcing. But a significant part of it in terms of my department is around leadership, and I think we have not failed to show that leadership, either in terms of support for victims and witnesses, or in terms of, for example, opening the remote evidence centres, or in terms of the support that we offer to vulnerable victims and witnesses. The question, I guess, at the end of the day is whether people feel at the point of sentence that they have actually got what they wanted, and unfortunately that's often not the case.
Dennis.
Can I ask the Minister to outline the state of the current prison population and specifically capacity within the prison system?
Minister.
At the moment, the prison population is sitting in excess of 1,800 prisoners. We have full capacity in McGilligan at around 500 prisoners. We have still some capacity in both Maghaberry and in Hydebank. But in the women's prison, there is again growing numbers of women being committed to prison over recent years. And we're seeing a general upward trend. The reason that we have capacity in the system in Maghaberry is solely because we've been able to open 2 of the old square houses that had been closed, and we've been able to repurpose those and bring them back into use. But it's not an ideal situation. It requires more intensive numbers of prison officers in order to look after the prisoners in those houses. And it is a significant challenge, I have to say, for the department. We're not in the same situation as some other regions have been in terms, for example, of having to consider early release or some of the more extreme measures around tripling up within the prison system. But we do still have a prison oversight working group that is looking at how we can drive those numbers down. And we also have a remand working group, because at the minute in Maghaberry 50% of those in prison have not yet been sentenced.
Ms. Ennis.
Thank the Minister for her response, and probably as a follow-on from my last question, does the Minister agree that access to education, training and rehabilitation should be the focus, the primary focus of our prisons, and what plans does the Minister have to increase the uptake and the access to rehabilitation and education courses so that we can actually drive down the reoffending rates?
Sir.
Well, we have been driving up the number of people who are participating in the education system, and as I say, particularly with the more general kinds of education, we can often extend that for short-term sentencing and also for those on remand. But it's much more difficult when we're talking about offender-related programmes where people are still maintaining that they're innocent and haven't yet been sentenced. It is a challenge because every time we move people from their cells to the education facility, that requires resource, and that resource has to be found from somewhere. At the moment in prisons, we're very highly reliant on overtime. That is a short-term fix. It is not a long-term solution to the problems that we face.
Ciara Ferguson.
Speaker, can I ask the Minister, within the prison system, what specific rules currently exist in relation to adjudications by governors? And that's in relation to the adjudications, the sanctions that are given out, and grounds for appeal.
Minister.
We operate a progressive regime within the prison system in Northern Ireland, so there are both rewards and penalties depending on people's behaviours. The adjudication process that goes on happens with the governors, and there is an appeal mechanism against that. But I think the best thing perhaps to do is for me to furnish the member with a copy of prison rules so that you can see yourself the issues on which the prison authorities would regularly be adjudicating, and perhaps get a better feel for how the process works.
Ferguson.
And I would very much appreciate that. Could I ask the Minister, has there been any consideration given to a departmental review of adjudications by governors in prisons?
Minister.
Hasn't at this stage. I think when we get our regular reviews of prisons, adjudications are one of the things that Susanna will look at in terms of the work that goes on within our prisons. We did have a situation back in 2005 when our prisons were considered to be fairly volatile and unsafe places. That is no longer the case. I think that progressive regime that has been put in place is one of the reasons why that has stabilised, and therefore at the moment it wouldn't be my intention to do a major review of that, but of course we're always open to hear if people have different experiences.
Minister, can you provide us with an update on your department's implementation of the Post Office Horizons System Offences Act 2024, please?
Minister.
So on the 19th of September 2024, my department issued letters to 12 individuals advising them that their convictions had been quashed by Post Office Horizons System Offences Act 2024. In total, we believe that covers about 116 convictions that have been quashed to date. That will enable those individuals to receive their financial redress. Further to these letters, the Department is coordinating the process of updating criminal records databases to reflect the quashing of the convictions, and the individuals will receive a further letter once that process has been completed. Work is ongoing to review the convictions of other individuals that may be within scope of the Act, and I would take this opportunity, Mr Speaker, to encourage anyone who believes they have a conviction for a relevant offence and who has not received a letter to date to contact my department to ensure that an assessment of their conviction is undertaken. The Act will obviously not undo the harm and distress that was caused, but I hope it will go some way towards lifting the burden on those affected.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you, Minister. You've mentioned about the burden. When do you think that those affected could expect to receive their compensation?
Minister.
Being as thorough as possible to ensure that no one is being missed. However, despite extensive searches, we don't yet have enough information for some individuals, and it would be important for them to get in touch with us to see if they are within the scope of the Act. In terms of when they would expect them to get their compensation, the financial redress schemes are managed by the Department for Business and Trade on a UK-wide basis. So our focus in DOJ is to overturn the convictions and delete the cautions. If there is, however, undue delay in sub-postmasters here accessing financial redress, I would of course be happy to raise this with ministerial counterparts.
Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask the Minister to outline the level of cooperation with the Department of Health and in particular the Minister of Health, given the high impact that mental health issues have both within our prisons and the wider justice system?
Minister.
There are many areas within the justice system where the Department of Health and the Department of Justice work together. So, for example, we already do so around domestic and sexual violence and abuse, where we launched a joint strategy last week. We also, along with the Department of Education, launched a further strategy on child criminal exploitation this week. So there is a lot of ongoing working, and mental health is a key part of that. As you know, within prisons, for example, all of the healthcare is provided by the Health and Social Care Trusts. So there is a challenge, however, in that early intervention in the community, alternative placements and support for those with severe mental health issues in the community, and an absence of adequate funding in that space is leading to people increasingly being committed to prison who have serious mental health issues. That is a challenge for the prison system. It is a challenge for the PSNI in particular, who often have to interface with people who are having serious mental health breakdowns, and therefore I think it is something that we can work together further on going forward in terms of resolving those issues.
I call Connie Egan. Mr. Dixon, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, mental health pathways are vitally important, particularly for those in prison who have mental health needs. But can the Minister outline for us what happens and how they are reconnected with community mental health services once they have left prison?
Minister.
Well, this is historically one of the really difficult parts of the system, the transition, and whilst we do a lot of work to try and ensure that there is a proper transition for people leaving custody, both in terms of having accommodation and also having support in the community, it is not always a seamless process. Unfortunately for many prisoners, when they go back into the community, they then have to go find their own GP because they don't know where they're going to be living, and then they have to be referred by their GP into mental health services. So prisons are trying with the Department of Health to look at how we can streamline those processes. The same is true when it comes to housing. The ideal situation is that we would in advance know where every prisoner is going to be living, have them pre-registered with a GP so that they're able to receive any medication, and also ensure that they have access to the therapeutic services that they've been receiving in prison when they leave. However, unfortunately, that is not currently the case.
Connie Egan.
Thank you, Minister. Could I please ask for an update on the domestic and sexual abuse strategy which your department launched last week, and specifically how that will work with the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy?
Minister.
Well, thank you. On the 25th of September, along with the Minister of Health, we announced the launch of the jointly led Department of Health, Department of Justice 7-year domestic and sexual abuse strategy. It was launched at an event hosted by the NSPCC and attended by those in the voluntary and community sector who helped shape the strategy along with departmental officials. One of the reasons we went to the NSPCC was because we recognised the impact that domestic and sexual violence has on children and young people. It's closely aligned to the Executive's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, but importantly is gender inclusive. I also announced the introduction of a small grant scheme that we will build on if and when further funding becomes available. That will offer members of the voluntary and community sector the opportunity to apply for funding to support new ideas and initiatives that align with our strategic objectives within the strategy. The grants will initially be drawn from our cross-cutting domestic and sexual abuse funding, with the goal of supporting vital work carried out by frontline organisations. We will also be working closely with the Executive Office colleagues to ensure that there is no duplication, but rather that we reinforce the same messages as we try to end harm in our communities.
Ms Egan.
Thank you, Minister. Relevant to both those strategies is the very successful Sexual Offences and Legal Advisor scheme run by your department. Can I please ask if there's any plans to develop this scheme further?
Minister.
Yes, Sir John Gillan recommended that publicly funded independent legal advice should be made available to all victims in cases of serious sexual offences, and we introduced the SOLAs as a response of that. That has been overwhelmingly positive in terms of feedback, and so I was really pleased to be able to confirm, as part of the recommendations of the Strategies Action Plan, that we're now going to launch an equivalent but very specific service for children and young people. The application process for the legal advisor positions that are available for that closes on the 1st of October. The impacts on children are understandably more extreme of this kind of violence, and having met with families with young victims who have told me directly how challenging it can be to engage with the criminal justice process, I believe that without access to advice on what the legal system might involve or require, and on what their rights are as they navigate their way through, we're adding to victims' anxiety and contributing to their reluctance to engage. I think it's really important that we're able to do that, and we will also, beyond that, be looking at how we can have a right to be heard within the court itself, so that where people, at the moment it's pre-trial, but for specific pre-trial hearings, that those legal advisors will be able to attend the court and be heard with the victim.
That brings to conclusion questions to the Minister for Justice. Members could take their ease, and we'll resume the